Bob then came up with an outrageous idea. He would attend Banning High and play football for Banning. What school in their right mind would accept a bunch of high school rejects with criminal records? But Bob pulled it off and began to train us like professional football players. Each morning before 5 a.m., we were up running wind sprints, obstacle courses, and laps around the track prior to breakfast. I trimmed down from 175 pounds to 160 pounds in a matter of weeks. And though I had a lot of definition, I felt skinny. By then, Sweetback was in the program too and joined the football team. We were in tip-top shape, a fast, vicious, talented crew of athletic misfits, the best players on the team, exceeding Bob's expectations. Here we were, Crips, playing team football, attending classes, and actually doing schoolwork. None of us even thought about ditching class or school. I was attending school and enjoying playing on the football team, without pretext or profit. For the first time in my chaotic life, there appeared a chance to uplift myself. One day, preparing to run wind sprints, I caught sight of Buddha in a football uniform, crip walking across the field, chanting, "Crips don't die, we multiply." He had been released, was enrolled in school, and was on the football team. Everybody extended their cousins' salutations to Buddha and went through our welcoming routine. A split-second hug, handshake, and a Kool-Aid smile. In our practice, we dominated so much that Bob told us opposing coaches from other schools accused Banning coaches of hiring ringers who played semi-professional football. It was discovered that we had criminal records and that no school in Los Angeles would enroll us. Pressure was placed on Banning High, and they kicked us out of the school. This was not a surprise since I had never experienced true accomplishments. I viewed everything through a negative lens, expecting only the worst. Since we seemed destined to end up in prison, a rehab clinic, or a local graveyard, I felt the need to continue striking blows at anything in the name of Crip. In my mixed up world, everything was twisted. Sin was morality. An immature perspective served as my wisdom, and war represented peace. In spite of my cripping ways, I was still receiving a paycheck of $125 every 2 weeks as a junior counselor. I started saving money to buy a car so I wouldn't have to steal one all the time. Cars were vital to us. Sweetback had stolen a 1963 Cocoa Brown Malibu. He was so possessive of it that he attacked our homeboy Cuz for spilling ketchup on it. Herc was so attached to his stolen 1964 Chevy that he bought new brakes and a new ignition for it. He kept that car for a year until he wrecked it during the shootout. The longest I held onto a stolen car was for 2 days, thinking that by then it would be on every cop's hot sheet. I planned to give most of my paycheck to Bonnie to stash and attend a big dice game held in one of the apartments. Buddha enjoyed gambling and was damn good at losing all of his money. Every youth in the program received an allowance of $50 twice a month, and most of them gambled, but Bob or one of his buddies usually would win. Whenever the sole Los Angeles Brim, Little Dottie, won the jackpot, everybody wanted to rip him apart, and I had to prevent it. But once in a while, a novice would win the jackpot, and this time it was me. I left with $600. That day, I ran across the car outside the area of Banning where we lived. Catching my eye was an immaculate 1963 metallic gold Lincoln Continental with snow white leather interior and suicide doors. After a smooth test ride, I paid $500 for it, then drove it back to the boys' home. Buddha said, "Cuz, that's you? That car fits you to a T." Everybody commented on how sharp, classy, and gangster-eats that car looked. During our next furlough to Los Angeles, Buddha and I were scouring the area to appropriate a set of wheels with Krager rims for my car. Spotting this guy Odell with a brand new set of Krager rims, I conceived him to follow me to a vacant house. Once there, I coerced him to take the wheels off his car and then placed them on mine. They were a perfect fit. Next, we had hydraulic lifts put in the front and thick white walls from the House of Chrome that gave my car a 1920 gangster look. The Lincoln was a real head turner, a modern army tank creeping through enemy territory, ready to do battle. With a flamboyant air that surpassed Marcus Garvey's, I'd arrive on the scene, Buddha and I in the back seat and Herc driving. We step out in complete crip attire with fancy wooden canes and a readiness to engage in combat. The arrival of the Lincoln struck terror that had my rivals fleeing on sight. The car also became a target for police harassment. I'd get pulled over several times within a radius of 10 blocks. Under the watchful single eye of their revolver, they'd hold me curbside hostage until a search of my car was complete. Throughout the day, I'd be tag teamed again by the Lenox Sheriffs, the Los Angeles Police, or the Firestone Police harassing and searching for contraband. In front of Bonnie, one cop scratched the serial numbers off my tape deck, then arrested me for receiving stolen property. When I sat in jail, there was a 72-hour investigation that culminated with the charges being dropped. Plenty of times when the cops pulled me over and found nothing incriminating, they'd arrest Bonnie for truancy. She was 17 and required by law to be in school. I thought marriage would resolve the problem. On our wedding day, there were torrential rains. The window button on the driver's side was stuck. The window wouldn't close, and I got soaked. The wedding was simple and brief. No tuxedo, wedding gown, wedding ring, wedding cake, and no traditional honeymoon. Since Buddha wasn't on hand as best man, Bimbo substituted as witness and rice thrower. Being callow and unpolished, I didn't take the marriage seriously, even though Bonnie was devoted and loving. I was loyal to Crippin' and nothing else. Our wedding day was expedient and unsentimental. After the ceremony, I dropped Bonnie off at her mother's house and went on my merry way. The following day, I was out caravanning with Buddha and other homeboys in a turquoise Le Mans we had bought. We went to a self-serve car wash on Western and 74th Street. While washing my rims, I saw a couple of carloads of dudes drive up and park on the side street. As two people got out of the car and walked towards us, Buddha boldly confronted them and questioned their motives. Trigger happy, Herc stood off to the side. I stood up and walked toward Buddha. The larger of the two introduced himself as Big James and the slimmer fellow as Michael. As I got up closer, I heard Buddha say, "Well, there's Tookie, what's up?" After introducing himself to me, James stated he'd been hearing a lot about the Crips and that he wanted to join us. He mentioned the dance at the Young Men's Christian Association, YMCA, behind the Crenshaw Mall where we could meet later that night. Buddha kept tapping me on the arm whispering, "Cuz, I don't trust this dude," but I waved him off and told James we'd be there. Buddha reminded me after they left that the YMCA was in the same area where we had raided several of the Rebel Rousers parties a week before and seized a bunch of leather coats. But I didn't forget, I simply didn't care. I was no zip damn fool. I did do some asinine things, but usually there was a method to my madness, except when I was loaded. I saw this as an opportunity to expand the West Side Crips and was going to take it. That night we showed up to the YMCA after 10 p.m. and parked our cars across the street in the shopping mall. I left my keys with Bonnie in the car while Lil Jackie stayed in Buddha's car. I opted for just a handful of us to be there, me, Herc, Blackie, and Monk. The YMCA looked completely deserted. There were no other cars nearby. I felt a little uneasy, wondering if this was a setup. When we entered, the YMCA was jam-packed. People were bumping with the James Brown song, "Pass the Peas." Though Big James was nowhere around, I decided to wait a while to see if he showed up. A short time later, this guy showed up saying, "Big James is outside, waiting for Tookie." Once outside, I saw James standing on the corner next to his homeboy Michael and another guy who had one hand in his coat pocket. As soon as we stepped into the open, more of James' homeboys appeared, surrounding us in a semicircle. Standing in creepy silence, the breeze chilled me. Is this a setup? Was Buddha right? I sensed James was stalling, but for what? Reinforcements? I tried to calm myself knowing that Herc and Buddha were packing, but was it enough to ward off the larger numbers? The silence was driving me crazy. I didn't like feeling trapped or vulnerable. As I looked eye to eye with James, anger began to swell up within me and my patience wore thin. I could wait no longer. I spat out. "So what's it going to be, James? Crip or what? If something was supposed to happen, then let's get the show on the road." Standing there at 6 foot 2 inches and more than 200 pounds, Big James was larger than me. but I believed in the legend that I was a giant killer. I saw indecision in James' eyes. I repeated the question with some heat. What's going to be, Crip or what? Big James then broke the silence. Yes. After a brief handshake, the tension relaxed, but heightened when a squad of cop cars descended upon us from every direction. A helicopter spotlight beamed overhead. They ordered us to get down on our knees and lock our fingers on top of our heads. Though the cops didn't find any weapons on us, several were found a few yards away. There was enough to take us all to jail. Bonnie had the presence of mind to follow the police car to the station. Inside, the cops interrogated us one by one. Since no one talked, we were charged only with possession of a deadly weapon. That's when James' homeboy Paul spoke up. There's no need to do that. The guns are mine. Riding the beef was common among my homeboys, but to witness someone do it outside our circle was unusual. I was impressed. Later on, Big James assured me they were ready to become part of the West Side Crips. Big James and his crew will be known as the Harlem Crips. During a brief stay in the Los Angeles County Jail, I ran into his homeboy Paul, who revealed they were supposed to smoke me on that particular night. They also planned to smoke the Madman Buddha because he was too dangerous to leave alive if I was dead. That was to be a retaliation for our mobbing and crip stomping some of their relatives and homeboys at a party. Paul said, "Cuz, we literally mapped out a plan to smoke you, but Big James didn't follow through." They were now West Side Crips. That's all that mattered to me. Driving back to Banning, I relished the moment, knowing the West Side Crips were evolving into the dynamic force I had envisioned at Camp Rocky. While buffing iron in the apartment at Factor Brookings with Little James and Buddha, I rehashed the latest addition to the West Side Crips and how we would continue to grow. I jokingly told them the world will know exactly who the Crips are. When it was my turn to work out with the barbell doing back arms, I stood before the full-length mirror and boasted, one day my arms will be so yoked up, no one will ever believe it. But Little James interjected and said, "That's cool, cuz, but what about a powerful chest?" He was right. I needed a monstrous, powerful chest. Little James worked his arms, but he also worked on his chest. He was the first Crip among us who bench pressed more than 300 pounds. He was the one who encouraged me to start benching, and soon I was out benching Little James and any other Crip. When I wore a short sleeve shirt, my appearance had a noticeable effect on women. It was odd how I always felt twice as muscular as I really was. Bob was increasingly aware of the gang epidemic spreading throughout Los Angeles and Compton. In addition to establishing more boys' homes, he wanted to bring public focus onto the serious youth problem. Bob published a small Compton newspaper with an article called The Baddest, with Buddha, Little James, Warlock, Melvin, Sweetback, Monk, and me on the front cover. It introduced the city to a gang called the Crips, blowing up in Compton and South Central. Occasionally, Bob would set up youth prevention workshops to expose this plague, but his warning fell on deaf ears. It wasn't long after his attempt to warn the masses that the Factor Brookings program was terminated. Our refuge was gone. We were kicked back into the gut of South Central and into the full-time cripping.